What is some dark shit going on around the world right now that the public probably doesn't know about? If you are a journalist or reporter, I am begging you to please report this. There's a major SPAP recall that has affected half of the machines out there, and there's no fix. People are literally dying because of this, and the Dodge needs to step in. Patients don't wear their SPAP mask. They can die. If they do wear it, they are exposed to carcinogens and can lead to cancer. Ventilators are affected as well. It's been over a year, and Philips only wants to reimburse $50 for the machines. We have patients waiting months for a machine. The sleep world is affected, including our jobs and lawyers. No one is talking about it. The FDA recall is serious. Bacteria are becoming more and more resistant to antibiotics. The widespread use of antibiotics for healthcare and agriculture mainly have caused bacteria to adapt. This means that in the not-so-distant future, we may have new epidemics caused by multi-drug resistant bacteria, who will be difficult to treat. In a handful of really poor regions around the world, managers of orphanages sometimes tip off the local pimps that a girl is about to age out of the system and end up on the streets. When the managers are actually halfway decent humans, the tip money they get goes to feed the smaller kids. Shitty managers obviously view that money as a side hustle to make having the main job worthwhile. 9% of Eritrea's population is slaves. The prevalence of modern-day slavery is way more than people like to talk about. Have you noticed nobody in bed with Epstein has been charged or even named, even after they convicted his girlfriend of trafficking? I moved to Sydney 2 weeks ago and can't believe how many public suicides there are. It's almost every day someone kills themselves from jumping from a building or in front of a train. I catch the train almost every day, and it feels like a matter of time before I see one happen myself. We're in a massive mental health crisis right now, and it's extremely hard to get help. The extent of fisheries and ocean life's collapse. Alaska just put the emergency brakes on its entire snow crab fishery, as the numbers suddenly fell off a cliff. Same for many salmon species, wild fish, etc. Plenty of fish in the sea seems like a saying that will be true forever, but it won't be. I have seen estimates that there would just be no commercially viable fishing by 2048. We are scraping the bottom of the ocean and emptying it of life. I'm in Mexico right now. Indigenous children are being sold for rape in the state of Guerrero like pieces of meat. Government turns a blind eye, and civilians are threatened by the cartel. It's messed up. Mass kidnapping of school children in Nigeria and other African nations, and the only ones talking about it since 2021 is UNICEF. For the record, I'm speaking from an American's perspective who spent the better part of a decade serving in Europe or Asia with the military, and can say for certain the only reason I'm aware of it is because of the anti-human trafficking awareness the US Air Force talks about constantly. I work directly with NATO and listen to us AFRICOM talk about it daily, and yet, you never hear about it in the mainstream American media. The troubled teen industry. They've been kidnapping and then abusing kids for money for the last 30 years, all legally. TTI survivor here. 17 years later, the place I was sent gives me nightmares every single night. 70% of the world's chocolate comes from West Africa. An estimated 1.5 million child slaves are engaged in chocolate production in Ghana and the Ivory Coast, alone not counting Nigeria and Cameroon. Highway of Tears, a stretch of highway in British Columbia where women mostly indigenous, and also some men have gone missing for decades. Known somewhat in Canada, but largely ignored by the general populace. Doubt it's known outside of Canada, but could be wrong. Women going missing from Indian reservations across some of the US. Many are young women and are probably being used for sex trafficking. There are some interesting podcasts on the subject. Behind every polished business facade is a hodgepodge of systems that are hacked together to service you. Data protection is second to revenue. All the networks and system engineers have the power to truly steal all your data. I've worked IT in a lot of industries and can confirm that. 1. All large companies have a mountain of shitty legacy systems that are so bespoke it's almost impossible to migrate away from them. 2. The majority of mission-critical systems are still dependent on an ancient access database developed by a guy called Steve, who has already left the company. 3. IT contracts managers are the sort of people who fall for Nigerian prince email scams. I once worked at a company that had been locked into a 15-year contract to use Windows 8 across their entire estate. 4. Despite service management being a relatively simple, well-documented function of an IT department, nearly all companies ignore best practice and devise their own fucked-up way of doing things with 10 different help desks. 5. IT project managers will always avoid using industry-standard tools in favor of purchasing some random software made by a company that inevitably goes out of business the week after they pay them 70% of the project budget. 6. Public sector IT is the absolute worst. Corporations will pinch pennies, but your local council IT department is almost certainly run by 50-year-old men who hoard obsolete hardware and just wander about with the Panasonic Toughbook under their arm, looking lost. Fast fashion is a human rights and an environmental disaster. There are certain parts of the garment construction process that cannot be mechanized, so humans have to be involved in the production, and the vast majority of them are underpaid. Additionally, fast fashion, especially in women's clothing, isn't made to last, so the fabric and the actual construction is shoddy, and the clothes wear out quickly, but fabric recycling is rarely available, so most of those clothes end up in a landfill. Natural fibers release greenhouse gases etc. This is an issue in landfills because organic materials decompose in an anaerobic environment in landfills vs. an aerobic composting environment, which creates more methane source as they decompose, and synthetics release chemicals into the water table. Saudi Arabia sentencing to death people who refuse to move out of their homes so that they can build Neom, their new megacity, and their relatives being sentenced to multiple decades of prison time just for protesting or merely posting their support to the cause on social media. A horrific percentage of the ships sailing around on our oceans are staffed by people who are either outright slaves or working in extreme indentured slavery circumstances. I'm a nurse in the US. The short staffing is worse than you think. People that think the healthcare system will collapse or is going to collapse just don't realize that it already has. Just because you don't see the hospitals on fire doesn't mean there isn't some severe staffing and supply shortages. In America, there are corporations such as BlackRock buying up tons of houses, whole neighborhoods, really. They're paying higher than asking price. They will then be permanently renting them out, and it will further destroy the middle class or working class. They will make middle class people permanent renters. Our politicians on both sides of the aisle are letting this happen because they take money from these corporations. Bacterial resistance to antibiotics is at an alarming level. There have already been instances of pan-antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria. This can throw us back to the pre-antibiotic era. That would effectively mean if you catch an infection, you die. No big pharma wants to invest in antibiotic research because of the huge R&D cost and relatively meager return, although everyone agrees that we desperately need new antibiotics. Some of you might remember a talk show on YouTube called Speechless. It was hosted by a non-speaking autistic woman by the name of Carly Fleischman, where she would interview celebrities. She used AAC augmentative and alternative communication to communicate. Anyways, she had a decently large amount of following from both autistic and non-autistic people. However, in early 2019, she made a post on social media explaining how her dad's boyfriend had been sexually abusing her. She included a picture of the man hugging her while she had an obviously uncomfortable expression. Her dad confronted her on the comments, telling her that she was being too over the top about the situation. Later on, the overall post was taken down, and a statement was made saying that her account had been hacked by what was likely an angry former employee of her social media accounts. It also explained that the last post that was legitimately written by her was in 2018. We have not heard anything her social media since then. Many people, myself included, believe that this was a cover-up of some sort and Carly is either still being silenced and abused or missing. I am surprised not enough people have come forward to really interrogate the situation. No one in her family is saying anything about her whereabouts or how she is doing. When they are asked whenever they make a new post since the incident, they leave the question unanswered. I highly doubt this was some joke that Carly would pull to get attention. It was far from the normal content she would make. I fear that when we do get an update post about her, it would be of her dying. This is the reality for disabled people, especially for those who are high support needs and non-speaking. It even happens to people who have had multiple TV appearances, co-wrote a book, and hosted a talk show interviewing several A-list celebrities. I truly hope Carly earns her justice.
That's all for now. Thanks for removing some digital apathy.